Hello, this is Zach Clark. I thought it might be helpful to put together this video and really clarify what we are seeing as the primary challenges that have emerged here in 2020 that leaders are going to be facing as they seek to grow giving this year and navigate the circumstances of 2020. And I also hope to provide you with some guidance and want to sort of spell out the specific guidance that we are providing leaders that we coach as we walk with them through these difficulties. There are three challenges. What we thought was just going to be one challenge in 2020 has become not one or two, but three. The first one was very predictable and anticipated, and that is the challenge of doing development in a major election year. So we knew that was coming because it's cyclical here in the United States. And the reality of what happens in a major election year in these modern times is that there is just so much information and noise and intensity that builds all through the year. So starting in January and leading all the way up until Election Day, you are up against a incredibly intense and constantly unleashed on a weekly basis communication and marketing and fundraising as it relates to political campaigns. And so what happens is, even if that doesn't alter your particular donor base behaviors in giving, although it does happen in some organizations, at the very least, it makes everything more difficult because it's hard to be heard. And you have to spend a lot more effort making sure that you're being heard, because givers are getting hit by all this content, all this information, all these calls to action, literally on every channel, including the phone. So every channel, meaning of media and communications, and then via phone as well. So in a normal election cycle, it becomes more challenging to get people to come to events. It can be much more challenging to get people to pay attention and take action. So we anticipated that. We knew that's coming, knew that would be difficult, especially in this year. What the other two, though, challenges could not be anticipated or forecast. So number two is what I'm characterizing as the psychological and behavioral impact of coronavirus 2019. So how widespread the medical impact is going to be and the economic impact is going to be, that's still unfolding and very unknown. And depending on the nature of your work, you may be dealing with a lot of medical decisions and questions. Schools, as an example, Christian schools are having to deal with a lot of medically driven decisions. Organizations that deal with people traveling overseas, there's a lot of questions that they're having to have answered and work through. But the real leadership challenge, I think the heart of the leadership challenge, is the psychological and behavioral impact of the fears related to all of this. What we know, even though we don't know how all this is medically going to play out in terms of how many people are really going to be affected, and we don't know the economic impact or the severity of that yet, what we do know for certain is that the fears related to this are most certainly shifting people's focus and attention and changing their behaviors. Right? We can already see that in so many ways. So we know for certain that it's going to be harder to get people to gather together in a large group event. So if your year depends upon the success of a particular large group event, that could become very difficult. We believe it will likely, depending on your area or region or community, it might be more difficult for a while to get people to come together in small groups. It may even become very difficult to have people meet together with you one-to-one. And as you know, that's really the driver of significant giving decisions, is face-to-face meetings. So that might become more difficult as well. So that's a major challenge, that challenge number two. The third challenge is the volatility in the markets and the unknown impact that this is going to have on business people, investors, asset holders, right? Business owners and asset holders. So it's way too early in the year to really know how all of that's going to impact businesses and real incomes and real assets and giving. Anyone that tells you that they know what that's going to look like is lying to themselves. But again, what do we know for certain? What we know for certain is that we're seeing reactions and behaviors in the business and investment world that we've not seen in over a decade. And in some cases, there are shifts occurring that have not been seen in decades. And so at a minimum level, what happens during those remarkable times is that people slow down their decision making. So the possibility that it might impact their business, the possibility that it might lower their income or giving, changes people's behaviors, and they start reprioritizing, or at the very minimum, slowing down in their decisions. So you can expect to see people maybe be slower about making new giving decisions or major giving decisions or longer term gift commitments. And how severe that gets is dependent on the realities that actually unfold from an economic perspective. So those are the three big challenges. My concern about those challenges, why I tried to really carefully construct a framework of how to articulate those with you, is that my concern is that I'm seeing a lot of energy go into debating the logic of these things. Like, well, we don't, the severity of it may not be this bad. And okay, well, with the economy, things turn down and then they come back again. And while all of those things may be true, that's trying to tackle all of these issues with this sort of logic and argument. And I think it's helpful to look and say, no, the challenge here is the fears and behavioral changes are very real. And the shifts that we're seeing economically and with asset holders and businesses are very real. And so the leadership challenge is how to respond to those things. So the guidance that we're sharing with people, I really have 7 things that I think you can really build on, and that we're going to be fleshing out with the leaders that we serve through our coaching. Number 1, remember that what you can't see and what you can imagine could be really dark and scary. But also, we can't always see or imagine what could really be amazing that comes out of this as well. Now, I don't mean that in terms of the real impact of the disease itself, the virus itself. But what I mean is that we can't, if we get so fixated on all the negative, dark, scary possibilities, then we're not going to be able to see and have hope and faith and confidence that God is also working in these things, in the people that we're serving and the people that we're impacting. So the reality is you simply have no way of knowing what is going on with an individual person unless they tell you. And so I think that's our first piece of guidance, is keep that in mind and be looking at trying to understand what's actually happening with individuals rather than thinking the leadership role is to imagine all the possibilities. The second piece of guidance that I would offer is that now is the time to become more active, more intentional, and get closer to givers and past givers, not distance yourself. So this is difficult because an appropriate medical response to the coronavirus pandemic is distance, right? Physical, social distance, at least for a time. So how do we get closer to people when they're wanting to distance themselves from us? So what we're encouraging leaders to do is to begin now being equipped to shift the disciplines that you're applying in your face-to-face work to being able to do the same thing virtually or over the phone or via phone conference. So I'm not necessarily saying that now's the time to actually do that. I think you'll know. You'll be able to tell if people aren't wanting to meet with you or trying to stay close to home. But you need to have the system ready at this time. So, like, okay, we're going to do video meetings. what system are we going to use? Are we going to use Zoom or something else? And it's not just what tool, what's the email look like that makes it really easy for them to join that meeting with me? Or what's the conference call number that we're going to use? And I want to get that ready so that when I reach out to someone to schedule a meeting, I can say, hey, you're probably trying to not do a lot of meetings right now. Oh, that's right, I'm staying really close to home. Hey, would you be willing to schedule a conference call with me? I'd love to be able to give you a report on what's going on with us, the impact of your giving, and where we're trying to go. That would have seemed odd a year ago to reach out to someone that is a major giver or potential giver and do that. I think now it will be appreciated and important. So that's the guidance that we're giving people there. Really maximize your time and energy if you're not able to meet with people face to face, but apply those same disciplines. 3, thanking and reporting is key. It is always key. But if all of this does begin to impact the levels of giving, the most important thing that you can be doing is saying thank you and providing people with reports on the impact of their past giving. What happens if people have less to give, and this is speaking very generally, but typically someone who's a giver won't say, okay, I have less to give this year. I'm going to look at the 50 organizations we give to and we're giving all of them 20% less. That's normally not what happens. What normally happens is a giver says, okay, I'm going to have to reprioritize our giving. I'm going to have to say no to these people so I can focus in on these folks. And they prioritize their giving to those people that they know and trust and have an understanding of where they're trying to go. And that's best shaped and kept in connection through reporting to people. So seeking their input, seeking their advice, and doing lots of listening. And that leads me to number 4. This may be one of the most important practical things to be doing for weeks and months to come, and that is seek wisdom and guidance from your largest givers. Your giving and your organization overall is impacted in a disproportionate way by a relatively small number of people. And there should be very few surprises or unknowns about what is going on with them. So simply put, donors will tell you what you need to know to make better decisions if you ask the right questions. And so now is definitely the time to be asking these larger donors, how is all this affecting you? What changes or decisions are you making in your business or your life? We're trying to navigate this too. So what advice do you have for us? By asking those questions, you're inviting people to tell you what their world is like, and that helps you have an awareness and understanding. So they can't tell you what to do, but they can certainly give you guidance and an awareness of what's going on with them and how that might affect you. So I learned that during the Great Recession, in that so many organizations were so shocked and surprised. Oh my gosh, we just got this gift from one of our largest donors and it's half of what it normally is, and this really impacts us. There should be very, very few of those kind of surprises, because if you're in relationship with these folks and you're asking these questions, they will tell you. And they'll say things like, hey, I think it's time that you start really looking at cutting some of your budget, or hey, I think it's time that you really need to plan on a significant drop in giving. And so I really experienced that in the Great Recession. It was a tremendously important thing to be able to make decisions in a time where if we had just sat around and tried to imagine what we should do, we would have really, really had a much harder time. Number 5, clarify your strategic priorities and your message. Make sure that that's very clear and up to date, and be ready to make some adjustments if things begin to sound a bit off. What can happen in fear-driven times and big shifts is that your message can start sounding a little tone deaf, like the whole world's talking and thinking and dealing with this, but you're talking about this. So we'll be working with that, working on that with you for weeks and months to come, and just trying to help you stay very tuned in to how people are reacting. But make sure that you've kept that up to date. Number 6, I'm not saying to take action on this, but to be ready. Be ready to be quick to adjust spending if it does become clear that there's going to be a very real or sizable impact on your giving and on your revenues. And what I mean by that is do the opposite of what most nonprofit organizations do. Most ministries, what they do when they get scared is they say things like, well, we got to protect the mission. And that's a dangerous phrase, because what that means is we're going to cut things that don't feel like our mission. And when you start cutting things that don't feel like your mission, often those are things that actually drive your revenues. Cutting your marketing, cutting your communications, cutting your development efforts, cutting your work to recruit new people, anything that drives the revenues, you want to try to uphold. And that's very painful and very difficult, because if you have to cut, well, where are we going to cut? If we're trying to hold those things as strong as we can, that means we are going to probably cut program. And so how do we do that in a way that doesn't violate our mission? That's a better question. So begin thinking about what is really core to protect. And those can be very painful decisions. And so I'm not saying to start doing that now, but I'm saying begin to get clear on the processes. How are we going to make great decisions financially as we navigate through this? We want to be as proactive as we can rather than reactive. And then number 7, I do think this is above all the most important guidance that I can give you. Try to remember that we cannot control the external factors that are out there and that are hitting us right now. That's beyond our control to impact what's happening medically, what might be happening financially, what's happening behaviorally in terms of fear and all that. It's beyond our control. It's external. But we have a remarkable and high degree of control and responsibility for how we respond. And I think that is a leadership challenge, and even can be energizing. You say we can't control any of that, but we can control how we respond. What is the way that we get through this and how we respond to these challenges? And so I think questions that help, and an idea that can help, is this question first. How do we respond as leaders to people who are in fear? How do we respond? Second, I'd say get better. Work on getting better. Getting better can really mitigate or minimize the external things coming at you. Again, I learned this in the Great Recession. We saw all those shifts, right? We saw people that had to stop giving. We saw people who had to cut their giving in half. We saw major donors who went from major donors to people who had real financial needs and crisis. We saw all that happen, and yet in 08 and 09, we had record giving. Now, how does that happen? Well, we got better. So when the external factors are coming to say, oh, well, everybody's giving is going to go down, so our giving is going to go down too, that assumes that in terms of the work, on a scale of 1 to 10, where 10 is doing development perfectly and 1 is doing it poorly, to say, oh, well, everyone's giving is going to go down, so ours is too, assumes that you are already operating as a 10 in terms of effectiveness. But the reality is, so yeah, if you're a 10, you can't get any better, and all this external stuff comes your way, yeah, your giving is going to drop. But if you're a 5, a 6, a 7, a 4, and you say we can get better, and you get better faster, that can minimize the actual external effect. And so this holds true in terms of marketing for growth, and it holds true for development in terms of growing giving. And so I would challenge you to think about how can we be getting better through this, not just holding our own. And I'm afraid that many organizations are just going to hunker down instead of how do we get better. And then I think a question that helps is, God, what are you teaching us? How are you growing us? How are you shaping and changing us through this? How do we apply the gospel to this situation? And then my question to you here at the end as a leader is to think about, what was Jesus' consistent response to fear? What was his consistent response? And I think if you look, his consistent response was, have no fear. Do not fear. Do not be in fear. And rather than argue with people and throw logic and debates about all the various reasons they shouldn't fear, instead what he did was demonstrate what his Father was doing and help people see what his Father was doing. And he would enter into their suffering, into their fear. And so I think that's a huge self-leadership challenge right now, is literally every day, maybe even hour by hour, Lord, help me be rightly related to you so I can respond to this fear, so I can go into people's fears without taking on all that fear and anxiety myself. And we know that, thankfully, Jesus knows perfectly and personally what it's really like to go into fear, because we can see in his own suffering and anxiety and fears in the garden how he processed that as well. So I think that's my final kind of question to you and encouragement to you to be thinking about as well. Let me hear from you. I'm very interested in knowing what you are facing in all of this, what it's like for you in all of this. I'm very curious about how you're framing these challenges, and I'm very interested to watch and see how you apply our guidance that I'm trying to share with you here. So thank you. I'm praying for you. Keep me in the loop, okay? Thank you.